All right. I will go ahead and do some introductions, and then it might be nice if we just can all introduce ourselves to give Jacob and James a better idea of who their audience is. But to start off, I am going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So Leslie and I know we've met some of you, but we may not have met all of you, are co-chairing the Teens Peer Community this year. And so we put together this panel with a student and a wonderful partner that the Florida YMCA Youth in Government program has been working with throughout the year. So Jacob Merkel is our partner from When We All Vote. So Jacob is the lead organizer of My School Votes, which is a branch of When We All Vote that came together in our COVID reality and really built the plane while they were flying it, constantly adapting and adjusting and really thriving and ultimately registering over 40,000 high school students since their virtual programs began in March. And then James is actually one of our students. So he's a student at Durant High School, living in Valrigo, Florida, and he participates in our Florida YMCA Youth in Government program and serves the program currently as our Williams Senate president. But this year, James also served as a poll worker for I don't know how many shifts, but it seemed like almost every other day, James was working the polls. And he was even featured on CNBC for his efforts. So we are really excited that both of them could join us today. And we can go around and do some introductions. So I'll start. My name is Christina Wiley, and I work for the Florida State Alliance of YMCAs as our State Director of Civic Engagement and Youth Development. And my primary responsibility is overseeing our Florida YMCA Youth in Government program in that role. Leslie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Leslie Cook. I am with the YMCA of Florida's First Coast. My primary job is I oversee the Take Stock in Children program, which is a scholarship and mentoring program. And then my night job is I oversee the teens across the association here. And I just want to thank James and Jacob for taking some time to be with us this morning.
Hello, I'm Charmaine Renos. I'm currently overseeing our academic program here for Team Up. Been working with the Y now going on 10 years. I have experience of starting leadership clubs in my old association at the YMCA, and I have a passion of working with teens. So I'm really interested in finding out some information and resources today.
I'll go. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Tatiana Bastian. I'm the program director in Gainesville at the North Central Florida YMCA. Pretty new to the role. I've worked here for a little less than 6 months. I oversee 5 different departments: sports, health and wellness, membership services, gymnastics, and childcare. So I'm very, very interested in hearing, like Ms. Charmaine said, about some of the resources that are available, because we're getting ready to relaunch a teen program coming spring break 2021.
I'll go. This is Kim Green. I'm so sorry I don't have my video on. I'm actually driving around picking up teen donations this morning. But I am in Florida's First Coast YMCA. I'm a senior program director, and I help to oversee our youth development programs and the youth development programs in my county. And I also oversee the teen leadership programs for the association. And we've been trying to do a lot of good work with keeping our teens engaged. We've had the privilege to be able to see them in person, but you know, it's just a matter of time before we're not able to see them in person. So I really am interested in hearing some strategies on this call this morning.
right, anyone else want to introduce themselves real quick before we pass the floor to Jacob and James to get us rolling? Alrighty, I'll pass it over to you then, Jacob, to kick us off, and just, fill in the gaps of anything I might have missed, and, address some of those questions that we chatted about, so.
Okay. Thank you, Christina and Leslie, for hosting this. James, we haven't really had time together, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you as well. I guess my preference for this, if everyone is okay with it, would be to speak very, very briefly, and then for us all to just have a conversation about what we've learned virtually. I think I'm especially interested in virtual learnings that can then be applied when we eventually are back in person, and like potential hybrid models. So yeah, I'm Jacob. I am the lead national organizer for My School Votes. So I manage a team of organizers, and then I've also been focused on Florida. I drove to Florida from Seattle in February and was on the ground for exactly 2 weeks before schools broke for COVID. So I'm currently in a hotel room, like driving my way back to Seattle to get my car. I guess the best way to sort of describe the last 9 or 10 months is just making things up, based on a student model of holding space to brainstorm and ask them how best to build teams. So My School Votes is historically a model where basically we would train students to do classroom visits, register people in person. We've seen that in person you can get over 80% of people registered in any given classroom just by walking in and saying, hey, I'm James. Here's why I care about voting. Here's how to vote or how to register to vote. Can I count on you to register right now? So the model has been really simple. It's just the tough part is getting those students to actually do it and to have the confidence and self-belief to like get up there in front of a classroom. When schools broke for COVID though, nobody was in class. Like people weren't going even to their Zoom classes. So we had a small group of students last April and May, and we ended up just hosting brainstorms for a couple weeks. And one of them was like, why don't we use Instagram to try to reach out to people and build teams? Something that was done really commonly starting in 2008 was like references to the snowflake model, which is basically a way of saying like you have one person, you build a team around them. And so that became our goal for the last 6 months or so, is we would use Instagram to try to find the Jameses of the world, people who seemed really committed at schools where we didn't have anybody, and then bring them into a welcome call that we hosted about once a week and say, here's My School Votes, here are our values, here are our principles. The welcome call is entirely student run. And here's what we're all about. Like, this is the vision that we're gonna try to move towards. So we'd recruit people in through Instagram, bring them into a welcome call, and then try to put a team around them. We ended up getting students in over 150 schools. We grew from 40 students to over 1,200 students in the span of 2.5 months. Hillsborough County is a really good example, where in mid-July we didn't have anybody, but from mid-July until the end of August, I assigned like 5 students who were in Miami to try to build teams in every single school, all 33 high schools in Hillsborough County. And by the end of August, they had 32 of 33 completed. So teams in almost every school. And that's in the span of 6 weeks. And that's like, again, making things up, just hoping it would work. So now we've like built this model. We know it works really well. And it's really a matter of like streamlining it. I think because of the 2020 election, because we wanted to get people registered as quickly as possible, we had to make multiple asks at a time and say, hey, James, can you create a club in your school? And can you send DMs? And come to these calls so that we're going to train you and how to make like tell a personal story or make a hard ask, and then also visit classrooms. But I think the really exciting part for me is like what comes next in terms of being able to have a year-long calendar where I'm not asking students to do a million things at once. And then B, being able to really focus on training. Because I think if there's one takeaway I have from the past 7-8 months, it's that even though it's really hard to like build connections and it's hard to make people want to come onto a Zoom call, you can world build online. Like you can, any sort of campaign environment can feel like a cult in a way that I think is really helpful to like getting work done, to just like get this sense of like collective buy-in, like we're all moving and doing hard things for a common purpose. And something I'm really interested in is combining, especially in the long run, that like more innovative model of reaching out to people and building community and doing trainings virtually with in-person actions. So I guess if there are a few principles to draw out, one would be like, ask the Jameses of the world what's gonna work for them. Ask the students in any given school, and especially historically disenfranchised areas, how do we need to reach out to people in your school? Almost every single idea that we had, the welcome call, the DMs, we ended up like creating a video to show people in class visits how to register. All those ideas were had by students. All of the exact, like the language, the welcome call and the video were all made by students. So I guess the other thing I would say is just like, I got really lucky because I lucked into very early on just figuring I'll hold space and let them make this their thing and try to watch them run with it. So I guess that's sort of all I got. I'd like to turn it over to James now and then just open it up for conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I guess one leading question for anybody else, just because I'm really curious about this, is whether you've learned anything in this online space the last 10 months that you think could be really helpful moving forward, even after there's a vaccine. God willing, there will be a vaccine soon. It's available to all of us. But even after there's a vaccine, if there's anything that that you're particularly proud of, or that surprised you, or that you've learned. So with that, I'll kick it to James. And thank you again, Christina and Leslie, for hosting this.
Hi, I'm James Williams. Like Christina said, I'm a senior at Durant High School this year in Valrico, which is in Hillsborough County. I'll just talk about my experience with my school votes. It was very welcoming, and like Jacob said, the students leading it definitely gave off a really welcoming and comforting vibe and just zone for a collective share of ideas. And personally, I reached out to all of my classes, but I guess the main struggle I ran into was people just weren't listening on the virtual platform. It was in school on virtual school. And my principal actually didn't let me come in to come talk about it to other classes. So I think it's just a level of interest that I ran into as a barrier. And I think that's probably the biggest issue we see nowadays. But the people that were interested were all in, and they were very excited, and we were texting back and forth, and there were a lot of questions. And one girl, actually, her parents have never voted, and then I registered all three of them. So that was really a good feeling, just to kind of give them that experience of voting together. But that's really all I have to say. I mean, my experience with my school votes was wonderful, and I think it was handled very well. But for me, I think the biggest issue is just level of interest and how to get people interested.
Yeah, I'll add to that I think, James, your experience was like far from abnormal. There were, especially Florida voting laws, as probably many of you know, can be quite restrictive. And so there were a lot of principals, especially in districts where we didn't have formal district backing, who were wary of letting students make class visits. Also, what we saw is we got over 10,800 people registered in Florida, but online, only 30% of people who tried to register were able to actually complete the process successfully. And that's with us walking students through each step. So like 30% of registration, so which is to say it would have been over 25,000 had it been registrations, had it been 100% successful. Now in person, you don't see that gap. For a lot of reasons. One, it's just easier to fill out paper forms. And then two, as James alluded to, it's way harder to get a sense of buy-in on a Zoom call when students are probably in bed or making food. There's this sense of anonymity that doesn't exist in person, where you can say like, Tatiana, I can see you right now. I'm going to put this paper in front of you. Will you take 5 minutes to register? Which is to say that we saw about 2.8 registrations per class visit compared to about 17 per class visit in person, which is a gap of about 6, or multiplier of about 6. So yeah, James, thanks for sharing. I just wanted to add that. I guess one more thing I'll say is we didn't really train the students that thoroughly. For the most part, it was me saying, to Adrian and Eric and Sophia, who happened to run the Hillsborough team that James was a part of, like, go for it, make it up. I don't have time to like train you that much. But I think they did a really good job of being warm and welcoming. And Gen Z in particular, like, the more welcoming you are, and the more you hold space for like that chaotic Gen Z energy and jokes that I will never understand but are funny nonetheless, the more people want to come back week after week.
Can I ask a question just about the social media platform that you use? You mentioned Instagram when you first started talking. So did you reach out in all platforms, and Instagram happened to be the one that you received the most responses back? How did you turn towards Instagram?
Yeah, so I think it began with students just intuitively thinking that would be the most effective platform. We didn't really use Twitter. We didn't use TikTok. Partly because students thought that Instagram would be more effective, partly because our model was largely based on having students reach out to schools or to specific students in schools where we don't have anyone yet. And those accounts are much more likely to exist on Instagram than they are on like Snapchat or on TikTok. And then part of it, any honest answer, is that I was organizing in Florida, and then I got a promotion to manage a team. And then also one of my coworkers took a different job. And so I was doing 3 jobs, and we just had to like focus on really, really well on one thing at a time. And we also realized that it worked. And so I think part of it is just the timeline from students going into schools, and then the registration deadline being 4 or 5 weeks after school started. So I think if I were to do it again, and in all likelihood, that will happen, I would focus on Twitter. I would focus on TikTok. I don't have a Twitter. I don't have an Instagram. I don't have a TikTok. I'm the wrong person to be like coming up with the ideas. But I do think that if we were to hold brainstorms and say, hey, students, like, how do we use TikTok to get people registered? How do we use Twitter? They would be on it like that. So part of it was that it seemed most effective at first, and then that we just had to streamline because we were already doing a lot of other things and testing a lot of other ideas. And it was easier to coordinate just across one platform.
And I have a question for James, but then a follow-up to that. Have you Googled My School Votes or your hashtag to see where folks are getting to your website? And the only reason I'm asking this is because I was on a presentation yesterday, and it was a fundraising one, and the lady pulled up her Google, and her analytics was showing people were going to her through Pinterest. And she actually was thinking people were going through Twitter and Instagram. So she was focusing all of her attention on that. Had no clue that like 226 of her clicks were coming from Pinterest. So just something interesting and something for you to look at. I'm definitely not a social media person, but I found that very interesting that that was the way folks were going to her website. And then James, kind of coming from a student perspective, you made the comment that your platform with school wasn't interesting. So just curious, what platform were you using, and how can we as leaders, with you as teens, make the platform more interesting and more engaging for you to where you want to be involved? Because I think as Jacob and all of us want a vaccine to be there and want us to be back in person, I think we might be virtual for a little longer than we really want to be. So how can we make this more engaging for you?
Well, to answer the first part of your question, you just use Zoom to talk to some of my classes, and everyone knows the struggles with that. But I really personally reached out to people on Instagram just because I think people are more likely to do something if you're having a one-on-one conversation with them rather than just posting something or adding something to your story. I did that too, but it's so hard to reach out to however many people you're following or however many followers you have. But I would say reaching out to people one-on-one is the most productive way. Via Instagram is what I personally did, but I don't know what everybody else did. And as far as how to make it more engaging, it's really hard virtually, especially right now since nobody can see each other. So for me, I think I'm interested in having calls and stuff, but I know some people get overwhelmed and they don't want to commit. And sometimes there's just not a level of interest. So I think someone said earlier, making short videos is really, really helpful about this is all you have to do. And if it's less than a minute, that's perfect for kids my age to watch. I think that draws a lot of attention.
James, I want to pull into the conversation the work that you and your presiding officer team have done with youth and government and cultivating a virtual space that I think is actually pretty similar to what a lot of YMCAs are facing, that they have an existing group of students who may have come to programs before and potentially new students whose parents want to get them involved in programs and some outreach efforts to try to meet new folks and pull them in. And I think it'd be helpful if you talk a little bit about what your student leadership team did to try to cultivate a space that provided the things that our returning students wanted to see and opportunities for socialization, but was also welcoming and inclusive to folks who might be new, and kind of how you all balance that and what advice you would have for YMCAs or folks like Jacob who are cultivating virtual spaces for young people, on how to do that and what, from your perspective, I mean, obviously it may be limited, but what you think people want to see from these virtual spaces and what you and your peers really need right now. How can we help you all?
I'm so curious to hear this answer.
So the presiding officers and we've been planning a bunch of calls, and we've done, I would say, educational and fun calls, and people are really attracted to the fun calls, and they're more we had a game night. I think we've had 2 or 3 big game nights that we just kind of have everyone on a Zoom call and we play just video games or virtual games, and just kind of sit and chat. We don't talk about anything work or experience or anything like that in YIG, but it's just there strictly for team bonding. And then we kind of use that to say, oh, here's when we'll have a leadership conference or come to our big conference of the year. And that draws more people in. So the team bonding is really, that's what I think is the right way to start things. And most people just look for friends. YIG is or youth and government, such a close group of people. And it's hard when you can't see them in person at all. Normally it's just a few times a year, but when you can't see them at all because we're all virtual, it's kind of a lack of bonding. So having those virtual events that really just let us talk to each other in a group setting, and everyone, it sounds cheesy, but just to kind of be at home, their YIG home, just really makes everybody feel comfortable and they're more willing to do things. So I really think that is, from my perspective, what I would need is just making sure that we have those opportunities, and we have that group of people, and just making sure that we as teenagers and youth know that, I don't want to say older people, but adults, I guess is the right word. Just kind of, we know that they're there for us and they're willing to help. And I think it would really just depend on the specific event or circumstance for how we would help.
Thanks, Jacob. That was thanks, James. Sorry, it's the J names. They're tripping me up. Thanks, James. That was really helpful. if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute. We'd love to hear from you all. But I am really enjoying this conversation because I think we've got two brilliant minds here. And so even like, I know I'm getting things out of this. And I think, Jacob, one thing that I've learned from working with you is that I need to be more innovative in how I'm thinking about our approach to things. And, you know, obviously COVID has encouraged a lot of folks to think that way, but I think even before COVID, like seeing the success that you all were having, like, because you had that clear objective of voter outreach to strive for, and you were really looking for strategies that were going to push you forward towards that objective, it kind of shifted how I was thinking about our program and how, like, we needed to stop thinking about everything in terms of business as usual and just like, well, this is the way that we've always done it, or this is what people have come to expect, and be a little more innovative in our approach. But I think for the folks on this call, one thing that would be really helpful for you to shed some light on is, I know that that can be a little challenging sometimes when you have this approach that's like completely new. Like, I know a lot of our Ys would be a little, and certainly understandably hesitant to, you know, reach out to students through an Instagram platform, for example. And I know that you probably had to navigate several of those conversations with people in your organization about something new or novel that maybe hadn't been tried before. And so I guess my question is just, what advice do you have from folks who might be working with teens who might have really good ideas, and they're kind of being that middleman between their teens and that great ideas their teens are having, and, you know, our institutions and policies, and how you kind of navigate that balance and advocate for both sides? That's my question.
Yeah, it's a really hard question. Also, I know, Laurel, you turned your mic on a couple minutes ago, so if you have a question that you want to add after, I would love that, or any feedback.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't have a question. Just trying to, I see it's a new world. I do before and after school program, but I'm still not all Zoomish, but I know I see my church student ministry really reach out on Instagram, and they have had a great following on Instagram with the kids, and they're doing, like you said, the games. They're putting little video clips together, fun, like they'll do virtual games and they'll participate and they'll do the clips together. So I just see that it is a connection thing because they're seeking connection. So
Yeah, and I think in some ways James kind of hit the nail on the head in answer to Christina's question. That Christina, you're right. I think a lot of orgs would be nervous about randomly messaging people over Instagram. When we all vote, no different. Like, we were founded by Michelle Obama in 2018, and so everything I do in a way that becomes very, very constricting falls under the umbrella of like making sure to. There's the Washington Post test. Nothing I do or say can ever, if it were to show up on the Washington Post, I would need to like be able to back it. And so there were a lot of conversations, especially around DMs and the randomness of it. But at the same time, I think there's a few ways to sort of alleviate that. One is the language of the DMs. We were able to say, hey, I'm a part of, you know, When We All Vote, and link to When We All Vote's page, so that the Instagram page, so that there's verification and so that they know what's going on. We also invited students to a welcome call that was through like a Mobilize link, which again adds validation and makes it seem much more official. And then we said, like, if you want to join a Zoom call to learn about us, great. But like, if James joins a Zoom call, he doesn't have to turn his camera on. Like, the first call was really big. We would have, you know, 150 to 250 people on per week. I guess 100, 150 towards the end there. But it's really anonymous. So I think that was helpful. But James hit the nail on the head where, especially for more local organizations, in terms of expansion or in terms of getting people on board, reaching out via relational organizing is just so much more effective. And I think we're seeing that especially through like Tufts University. Tufts Circle does a lot of research that says, for example, 2 weeks ago it came out, 70% of Gen Z who voted got their voting information from social media. Not just, but like got specific information about how they were going to vote through social media. And so I think having people do that relational organizing, having people reach out to friends and people they know rather than anonymous stuff, that's like really the core of organizing. And that's as old school as it gets. But I think in some ways we're able to do that more quickly and sometimes more effectively online. So yeah, the amount of hurdles that I had to jump over in order to get clearance on Instagram DMs was a lot. And I would imagine other people, face similar structures. I also will just add that, especially with such a new program, like principle number one was we're going to fail over and over and over, and we're going to lean into it. And I think just getting, especially the students who built the program, who like led the district calls, and we called those students fellows, getting them really, really comfortable with failure and like leaning into that and searching it out meant that if there was a question that they didn't know the answer to, if somebody came into a call and felt uncomfortable, they were going to try to like seek out that person, have a one-on-one conversation, support them after a call, and also be okay if they didn't have the answer. But to some degree, Christina, in many situations, I think you're not really going to be able to work around those things as much. And so it's really, really context dependent.
Yeah, I think that that's like such an important life lesson too that we can provide for teens, is like how to navigate failure, because it's something that like, building that resiliency is like so critical and something that, we all face in life. But that's really helpful. And I mean, I think Jacob, like, I want you to know that you've inspired me to just like take on that torch, to carry that torch for our students and to like be an advocate for the great ideas that they're having and try to like lift those up and support them. And even if it might say, okay, like this was a great idea, this part, like we're concerned about the legality. And I think like teens are smart. So like when you have that conversation with them and help them understand why a certain portion of the plan might not be possible, like they're going to understand and they might say, okay, well, like maybe we could try this, or they're going to adapt the idea to fit the parameters. But I really think that that's been hugely inspirational for me in looking at like all of the different things that you all tried, especially like looking, ahead. Like youth in government is in this pivotal point as well now, realizing that like our virtual programs might have to continue, and like how that's going to impact our program and the pipeline of student leaders that we have rising, and how we need to adapt and be flexible and bring in new people. And I'm sure like many Y programs are feeling that as well, and adapting to like they might have limited in-person programming, and they're having to figure out like how to sustain a membership through our current COVID reality. Or they might have in-person programming, but it would be really smart for our Ys to think about how we can continue to reach people virtually, so that when we're able to come back together in person, we don't have like a huge sector of students who don't have any relationship with the Y.
Candace, Doug, Tatiana, Kimberly, are there any questions or bits of feedback that any of you want to give? I ask partly because Zoom is weird, and sometimes I feel like when I'm not, I need like 3 or 4 invitations to speak. So does anybody have any questions or things that they want to add?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And also, thank you both for all the work that you guys are doing. It's awesome. And it is really good to hear how much you've been able to engage students virtually. And I think I mentioned earlier, we're on the other end of the spectrum where we've been able to engage some students um, through in-person programming. And I know that we've missed students because, families aren't comfortable yet, regardless of the steps that we're taking to keep students safe in the program. Um, so I guess my biggest question for you all is what what do you hear, like what do you see that students feel like they're missing the most that we can answer through virtual programming? Because we thought about, college and career readiness type things and mental health awareness, or being able to have an open table forum with college freshmen who have gone into their freshman year during COVID, things like that. But what are students saying? Like, what would they like to be engaged with virtually?
James, do you want to lead us off?
Sure. I mean, as far as things we can do virtually, I think teens we just want resources for, and it depends on the context of what we're talking about. So as far as when we all vote, we want, resources, because although I would say my generation is smart, we are kind of lazy and we don't want to do the work ourselves. So if it can just be laid out for us, and if we can have all the information and resources ready and available, and for something like in youth and government, how to write a bill, if we can hold a call and just have all the resources ready and available. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just making sure the kind of the how to is really pushed and we understand how to do that.
James, do you think, I'm asking this question very, very seriously because Kimberly, I ask the same question of our team all the time and I don't have a good answer to it. James, do you think that students are looking for virtual community? Or do you think that students hear the word virtual community and think, I don't want that unless there's another purpose to it?
I think a lot of people just haven't accepted that this is the new normal, and that virtual communities will stay around and that we will be doing Zoom or video conferences for a while, even once we do have the vaccine and we're back in person. So I think making us kind of understand that, it's not going away. We might do it a little less, but it's not going away. I think that might make them a little more open to the idea, and more teens might start getting involved.
Okay. I'll give a couple really tentative answers. One of the things that we heard from students over and over, especially this summer before school started, was that My School Votes was one of the only consistent, reliable things in their life that they could turn to for structure. So I think part of any answer is like community building, but community building in a way where they can trust that we will be there next week. One of the difficulties for me has been My School Votes was a pilot project, is a pilot project. And so I haven't been able to say we have students who started in high school last spring, are currently in college. Multiple students who said to me, I want to do this for the next 4 years. How do I do it? And I can't give them a solid answer right now because I can't plan 2 years out. And that kills me because I think, especially virtually, just having a community to turn to and that sense of reliability is so important. I'll also add something I failed at over and over again was creating smaller pockets. If you hop on a Zoom call with 50 people, it's not really a community. It's hard to speak up. It's hard to, have our sense of to express ourselves and be vulnerable. And so I think community, but creating those smaller pockets where week after week, maybe Kimberly and Tatiana are going to look forward to talking to each other every Thursday. So I think that that sense of reliability is really important. Two other things. One would be, there are so many just brilliant students at every school who are looking for a way to affect our country, who are looking for a way to do moral work, who are just waiting to be invited to do something important, and frankly, who like haven't ever felt like they've been invited to do something important. Like there are 15-year-olds I work with who, I kid you not, are better organizers than many of the staff at One Wheel Vote. Like that is not an exaggeration. And I think for those people, and it's not everyone, but there are a lot of students who are like, give me an opportunity to make other people's lives better and I will come alive. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I would say is, and this is sort of a personal organizing principle that I have. I think making big asks of people is often more likely to result in a yes than a small ask. And this is, again, something I failed at. Like James, you might have experienced this, especially as it got bigger and we like lost quality and we hadn't planned that much. That like for new people coming in, the ask wasn't that big. The ask was like send a couple DMs and like visit classes. And we had a hard time scaling, but I think something we did really effectively at the beginning of the summer is say like, hey, Sophia, Eric, Adrian, the three of you, your job is to build teams in every single school in this county. It's a huge job. I don't expect you to succeed, but that's the goal. And I think time and time again, I've just realized that Gen Z, and James, feel free to chime in here, you know, have all grown up, or everyone I work with has grown up post 9/11. The average high schooler has more stress, more anxiety than this is statistically proven, than somebody returning from active duty in Vietnam, who literally just been in war for the better part of a decade. Gen Z is tough because you've had to be. And so I think part of that is like this readiness, this willingness to say, yeah, the world could be a lot better. And this readiness to like get involved. And I'm so lucky for that, because again, I didn't, towards the beginning of summer, train people all that much. It was pretty much just like get up and go. And we had 10 different school districts, and I put like 5 students in each school district and said like, try your best, figure it out. We'll learn as we go together. But so many of these students are like fully fledged organizers. And I think leaning into that is a really important part of any answer. Also, sorry, I get very long-winded about these things, and I'll step back.
No, thank you guys so much.
And I want to chime in there too for the folks on this call, just to say, I think it bleeds really well off of what Jacob was saying, that so many students want to do something meaningful. And I feel like that's like a huge need right now that the Y is well equipped to fill, because a lot of schools might be still having sports programs, but maybe they don't have their drama program or their debate program or those types of programs that students who might not be interested in sports are really looking to engage in. And there's such an issue with like our teachers are just so burnt out, and cultivating those spaces for those students is like a lot of work. And with youth and government events transitioning virtually, it's freed up a little bit of funding, and it might free up a little bit of funding in the spring if we have to transition. So that's kind of funding from the DOE that's meant to be used for civics, meant to be used for service. And if you have a teen program at your Y and you think you have students who would get excited about doing service, excited about doing a civic engagement project, please reach out to me, because I would love to talk about how we can set aside a few $1,000s to equip those students to be successful and have the resources that they need to take on that project, because that's something I get really excited about. And if you're excited about it, I would love to work with you and figure out how to make that happen for your students, for those students who really are looking for and need those opportunities right now. Yeah, Kim, I was thinking of your students for sure. So I would love to talk about that. All right, we have just a few more minutes. If anyone has other questions for Jacob and for James.
James, what did we do poorly?
And when we all vote.
Yeah.
I thought it was run pretty smooth. I think for me, the trouble was when it got smaller. The big calls were good. I really enjoyed them and there was a lot of energy. And then once it kind of broke down, like you said, when you put a whole bunch of pressure and stress on someone to do a lot,
Mhm.
it's just kind of one more activity that they need to do. So I think there it wasn't the same energy. It was still, you could still take away from it. It just wasn't the same energy. And something you said earlier about making a big ask, I actually think, now that I think about it, it does work better, because if you ask someone for a lot and they say no, you can always go down and then they're more likely to say yes if your second ask is little or smaller than the first. But yeah, I think When We All Vote was run pretty well.
Tatiana, were you leaning in to ask a question earlier, or did I misread that?
I did have a question, but you guys actually answered it. It was just, I'm a little nervous about teens and virtual programming, but you guys answered that.
Yeah, and to the big ask point from James, we secured funding through the summer, midway through the summer, but originally I was just completely forthcoming with students, and there were about 20 students who were like, yeah, I want to do 30 hours a week, every week in a volunteer role. And that was me saying, first off, I hate that I don't have any funding secured for you, and I hate that in these spaces, like, young people are so often exploited. And also, if you don't have anything to do this summer and you want to make an impact in 2020, like, here's a way to do it. So I was able to get funding after the fact, but there were 20 students, and as more people came in, we would have been able to keep getting students in who said, yeah, I'll like 30 hours a week in a volunteer capacity. I love this work and I will absolutely do it. So James, I think that's a good point.
All right, well, I think that brings us to time. So I just put my email in the chat if anyone would like to add theirs, if you want to connect and continue these great conversations. You know, I think that we all have learned so much throughout these past, 9 or 10 months or so, and we can really get a lot out of connecting with each other and continuing these conversations. And so I think if I had anything that I wanted to close this session with today, it would just be, encouraging you all to reach out and to ask the teens in your community what they need, and to be an advocate for what they're telling you, and challenge your why to step up and meet that need. And if you want help with that, or if you want to have a conversation about that, I'm happy to be a resource. And if you have questions for James and Jacob, I can also connect you with them. So Jacob, I think, has, as many organizers do, potentially an expiry for his time with When We All Vote, My School Votes, but I hope that he'll stay connected with me in the future. So I could probably at least get you linked on LinkedIn. So thanks so much for joining. Leslie, you have anything you want to add before we close out?
No, thank you guys all for joining us. We appreciate that. And James and Jacob, thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day today.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.